absolutely nothing in that statement about phasing out Nokia. It wasn't presented as a phase Nokia out release.
Okay.
It's very much we've done a deal with Ericsson, and it's an Open RAN deal that's worth 14 billion over 5 years. So a pretty substantial Open RAN deal. Mentioned a few players in Intel, Dell, Corning, and Fujitsu, the other players named.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Those who are watching, and perhaps you might even detect it if you're listening, you'll see that we're having to do this one remotely. And that's because the trains keep going on strike. I think this has been going on for about a year or so, isn't it? Yeah, because we had to do the Elena one last year remotely because of the trains.
That was miserable because you actually wanted to be in for ones like that, quizzes and
exactly.
End of year fun and games really needs to be done in the studio. I feel.
Well, and hopefully we will next week. We're Elena's lined up again. This has now become an annual thing. She's going to start billing us, and hopefully we'll be able to drag ourselves in, trains permitting. So this is a remote
strikes next week. We should be fine.
No.
They usually give notice these days.
And partly because it's remote, and partly just because of time constraints. Anyway, we're going to make this one short and sweet, probably even under an hour. Can't remember last time we managed that. So I'm not going to muck around too much, but there is stuff to talk about in terms of just us going out with industry types, mainly Wednesday. Well, actually Wednesday and Thursday. We'll get on to Thursday. So Wednesday, I braved the train strikes. And I went out and I had lunch with Ericsson, which is really nice, at a Chinese restaurant at the top of the Shard. Really tasty food. And all the UK posse were there. And they even had one or two people fly over from Sweden. And yeah, it was just really nice. They're always quite chilled and informal. Ericsson, they're just happy to have a chat. I think the trains let you down, didn't they, Ian? So you weren't able to make it.
There was specifically the Southwest Rail line that day, so it was either get and sit on a bus for an hour or not come.
No. Well, you were missed, but let's face it, if only one of the two of us has got to turn up, I'm the winning option, really, aren't I? So there was that, and then there was Christmas drinks with 3 after. And I worked out it was about a 45-minute to an hour's walk from the Shard to St Martin's Lane where they were, and I was with 3 other hacks. I'll give them all a shout out: Chris from Mobile World Live, Manny from I think Developing Telecoms, and
Harry.
What's the other one? Harry. Sorry, Harry. I forgot about you for a sec there. And we started
with you, and I knew it.
Yeah. And we started walking, and we had one pit stop at the Anchor, and then we went over the Millennium Bridge. And I got to say, I'm by far the oldest out of that group, and the rest of them started moaning about how they're getting a bit knackered from walking. And I was like, oh, come on. Anyway, we did have a look out for a taxi, and none came up, and we ended up walking, but I certainly worked up a thirst, which was amply sated at 3. And the last thing I remember at 3 was us just lining up old fashions. I mean, at the end, I think that we had to leave someone drunk. We'd lined so many up.
Do you remember a certain person falling over?
Sorry?
Do you remember a certain person falling over?
Not
you, but someone in our team.
Oh, yeah. No, I do remember a certain member of our team being on quite wobbly legs. He said that never happens to me, and I was like, yeah, well, sometimes he reckons it's because he didn't eat enough, whereas perhaps because I had that big Chinese meal, somehow I was just a sponge. I mean, I was pissed, don't get me wrong, but that was a good night. And then I think so that's stuff we've been up to, and then I won't get into it now, but we were all going to go and hang out with BT yesterday, but we had such a nightmare. My colleague had to get an Uber back home because there were no trains. And it's just such a nightmare that we just decided that trying to do the train thing again wasn't going to happen. So that's why we didn't go to that thing yesterday and why we're doing this today. But you did, so you'll be telling us all about that in a bit. Now, I'm not going to witter on for too much longer because we haven't got very long. The obvious big telecoms news story of the week, which I didn't cover because I actually wasn't working Monday and Tuesday this week, was on the lash with Ericsson on Wednesday, so I haven't really been doing much work. Was the fact that AT&T or Ericsson, I guess it was Ericsson that announced it, but announced a really big deal, a RAN deal, which has been positioned as Open RAN with AT&T in the States, which was a big enough deal not only for Ericsson share price to go up by certainly a few percentage points, I think, but it's a big enough deal for Nokia to feel that they had to issue their own press release going, yeah, it's not the best, is it? But don't worry, we're still cool, or whatever it is they said in their press release. But seeing as you covered it, Ian, and you didn't just cover it, but you had a really interesting angle, I'm gonna pass the ball to you. I'm gonna ask you if you wouldn't mind first just telling us the bare facts of it, and then by all means get into your what you discovered when you got under the skin of it.
Yeah. So the bare facts, I mean, there's an interesting build up to it actually, because Mike was the first person to do a report on what's sort of going on
Mike Dano from Light Reading.
Mike Dano from Light Reading, I think, really got the scoop on this whole.
Oh, nice one.
Yeah, it looks like Ericsson AT&T is about to phase Nokia out of its network, kind of similar to what Verizon did, if you remember, a few years ago. And I seem to remember we were in the pub actually last Friday after our last pod.
Right.
And I saw the emails going around, and he picked it up from. So another shout out to a guy called Earl Lum, who's an analyst, has his own firm, works in the chips area. Really, he's one of these guys. He sort of does teardowns of base stations and looks at the
right,
but does know his stuff. I mean, I've spoken to him a few times before, and he's very good. And he'd put up. So he'd obviously spoken to some people internally, it seemed, and got wind of this plan to move Nokia out of its network. And I thought this is interesting, but a bit surprising. But the share price started to move early the next week, and then before you knew it, AT&T had come out with this statement about a deal with Ericsson. And now it's a joint statement actually, the AT&T Ericsson statement. I from Ericsson, but I think if you get to AT&T's website, exactly the same statement.
They've got something. Okay.
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing in that statement about phasing out Nokia. It wasn't presented as a phase Nokia out release. Okay. It's very much we've done a deal with Ericsson, and it's an Open RAN deal that's worth 14 billion over 5 years. So a pretty substantial Open RAN deal. Mentions a few players in it, Intel, Dell, Corning, and Fujitsu, the other players named. So it gives it the appearance of perhaps being an Open RAN deal. And then it slowly emerges during the day, and it was Reuters, I think, or Bloomberg first, who sort of present, or maybe even the Wall Street Journal, who very much presented this as AT&T is replacing Nokia with Ericsson, basically, using Ericsson Open RAN equipment. And then Mike got on the press conference they did with, I think, Yigal Elbaz is his name. He's effectively the chief technology officer of the relevant bit of the business. And it was, it came out obviously during that press conference that the plan was to move to Ericsson as a kind of single supplier, effectively. A systems integrator. Let's sort of take their version of it. A systems integrator using its own technology and sort of bundling in some other stuff as well. And that Nokia would not in future have a presence in the AT&T network. So it's pretty devastating for Nokia, really, and I was.
Can I just quickly butt in? Do you have a sense of? Do you have a sense of what the split was between Nokia and what the current in AT&T's RAN? Yeah,
I know exactly what the split is. So the split is 65% Ericsson, 35% Nokia. That 35% Nokia is between 50,000 and 60,000 sites. Right. And work out what the whole kind of footprint is and everything, but that's basically the macro network for AT&T at the moment. Now I've spoken to people sort of on deep background on this and written coverage based on that, and from what I understand from conversations is that what's basically happened, this is my interpretation of it, but it's pretty sort of accurate, is round about the summer, AT&T started having discussions with its suppliers about moving to a single RAN deal. And they thought it was, now clearly, if you're going to do that, it's better to go with the bigger supplier rather than the smaller one.
Yeah. So by single RAN deal, you mean single RAN supplier?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the why would they do that? Well, it's really driven by economics. It's that they feel there's an economies of scale advantage to just having one company. And that they obviously made a good offer by Ericsson to do this, and if you're gonna go to one, it's always easier to sort of move with the bigger one, clearly, because then you've got less to clear out from the one that you don't want to carry on using
It
anymore.
makes sense.
At first, and I think the Earl Lum research note, and obviously some of the other speculation, is that maybe Nokia's not sort of measuring up and that something's gone wrong again. They were not in a very good position, if you remember, back in 2019,
Yes.
2020, when Verizon dumped them. And at the time, that wasn't such a surprise because they'd had all these 5G product problems. And
Yeah, they'd admitted that they
Yeah.
had those missteps with FGPGAs or whatever they're called.
Exactly. And yeah, and that's all sort of ancient history now. This is the surprise thing, that if this was a technical thing, years later, they've done a lot to sort of correct their problems and address all the deficiencies that they had and make sure that their products are really competitive. And the message I've been hearing from analysts and from my own sort of examination of it and all this stuff, and I try and track that side of the market fairly closely, is that they're kind of back in the game. You wouldn't look at them now and say there's a big reason to sort of move away from Nokia based on anything that they're doing technologically. So I think the sort of suggestion that it was to do with, there were a few things thrown out that it was to do with fan units, that they were using these expensive fan units on radios, and that didn't suit AT&T. To me, it didn't make a lot of sense because they've done a lot of massive MIMO sales in India, which is a very hot country, so if these things were malfunctioning in hotter AT&T markets, it didn't really make sense why they would have had success in India. But more importantly, they do actually have equipment that doesn't have these fan units if you want it. They've got both options in the mix.
Right.
I think another reason cited was there's still too many Intel chips there, which is, they were using Intel originally in a kind of single supplier arrangement around about sort of 2018, 19, when they had all these product issues. But all that stuff's been phased out. That was last year, the last of that equipment out anyway. So it didn't really stack up. And I think it's very much an economics-driven decision, basically, what they've done.
Okay, so superficially, as you've summarized it, they decide to move to one. There's economies of scale for only having one supplier. It makes sense to go with a supplier that was already 2/3 of your stuff anyway. But then there are more twists to that tale, aren't there?
Yeah, there are. The rationale for this, AT&T's rationale. So if we sort of look at it on their side and try and be as kind to them as possible, what they essentially seem to be saying, and it's slightly ridiculous in itself, if Open RAN started out as this thing where we can inject more competition into the market, we can mix and match suppliers at the same mobile site in a way we never could before because the interfaces have been opened, and we get diversity and we have plurality, and that's the important thing. And that's basically the big Open RAN pitch. That's been the story all along. What they now seem to be saying is Open RAN justifies having a single vendor because we don't have to worry about being dependent on it anymore, because if there's any problems, we can swap it out because it's Open RAN compliant. That seems to be what they're saying.
Right.
Essentially. That's the new story. That's the new Open RAN story, is that because it's got these open interfaces that it didn't have before, in future we can introduce new vendors more easily, and we can sort of say if we want to put some radios in there from Mavenir, let's say, then it's easier to do it, and therefore we don't have to worry about being dependent on Ericsson.
Right, so they're going all in on Ericsson for now, but they're saying it's not a big commitment. It's not a vendor lock-in thing. As soon as they piss us off, we'll just get someone else in. No worries.
Well, but if you take it to its logical conclusion, that rationale, and if everybody starts going around saying the same thing, that's even more reason then to have single RAN deals, isn't it? If that's your logic, that we can have a single RAN deal and not have to worry too much because we can take it out.
Totally, that seems to be what they're saying. If you've characterized it accurately.
Let's think about the scenario when they might decide to take something out, okay, which is what they're saying. For a start, there's this issue of you buy equipment, it's bloody expensive, massive MIMO especially. They all complain about how much they have to invest. None of them are spending very much money this year. You don't want to take this stuff out unless you have to, early. You don't want to put it in there and it's 7 years lifetime and you're taking it out after 2 or 3 years. You want to leave it in there and get the most out of it and fully depreciate it. So to put stuff in and then suggest that 3 or 4 years on, you're going to take some of it out and introduce another supplier, I find slightly far-fetched. What's another circumstance you might decide to replace equipment? If someone gets banned, as in Huawei, but you don't ban the component. That's certainly not what's happened in the UK. You ban the whole RAN, So you can't just take out Nokia's antennas and go and keep its baseband equipment and bring in a new antenna supply. You've got to get rid of the whole player. So I find this notion that they'll be able to put other suppliers in future. Very far-fetched. It will only be a multi-vendor Open RAN if it's done from the very outset. And the only other player
as multi-vendor, yeah,
as multi-vendor. Now, the only other player announced in that statement that really makes this possibly look like an Open RAN deal is Fujitsu. Dell and Intel, and this is the thing that we've talked about on the podcast a few times before, this conflation of Open RAN and Cloud RAN. They're not really Open RAN players. Verizon has a very big Cloud RAN network. It's done a lot of work, as I understand it. With
by the way, Ian, I've had lots of, I'm not going to name them, but I've had lots of very senior, very established industry professionals conflate the two. And I'm not saying that you're wrong to deconflate them, but I'm just saying this is a common thing.
Yeah, it is. Well, let's make it clear then. Open RAN is basically the most important thing with Open RAN, and what it initially started as was opening the front hall interface. That's the bit that links your radio with the computing equipment, basically.
Yeah, so you can get a separate radio from the computer equipment. It's not all one.
Yeah, or the
computing
equipment, rather than the computing equipment, the software that runs on that computing equipment. That's the important thing, really. So the idea is, let's say, a Fujitsu radio running on Ericsson's baseband software. That's kind of what Open RAN would be, yeah. Whereas Cloud RAN is using it's virtualization, basically. It's the same concept that we've had in other parts of the network for a long time. It's running your software on,
and it's got nothing to do with that front hall link.
No, it's
I actually agree with you. I mean, you and I have argued a toss over it, and you've clarified it to me, and they're distinct things. I mean, the Venn diagrams overlap in so much as they're technological trends that seem to be happening in parallel, and there is a degree of commonality in so much as they're supposed to open up this sort of flexibility and scalability and easy upgradability and that sort of thing.
They're thematically the same in terms of openness, because I guess that the idea with virtualization is that your software becomes something you can deploy on general purpose equipment, and then it becomes easier to cloudify it and take advantage of common programming languages and move it between different cloud platforms and all this kind of stuff. So you'd have Ericsson's baseband software basically running on Intel Xeon processors or another general purpose processor. I mean, at the moment, as it happens, there's not really a lot of alternatives to Intel Xeon processors. It's such a dominant player in the market because it's...
And that whole... Go on, sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say it's server CPU market share, and this has been a big issue for years. Everybody knows this. With x86, they're kind of the dominant player in that space. So it's not exactly a diverse market, and that's one.
And then we've got all the other stuff that you've been excellent on
to
do with the pros and cons of general purpose processors, specialized processors, and the looker side versus the other bit.
And I think that's starting to change. There's signs of progress there, but the point is, it's not really Open RAN. See, you can't look at Dell and Intel in that statement and say mentioning them makes this an Open RAN deal. The only one.
But is it Open RAN if they've got an open front hall interface?
Okay, so that's where you get Fujitsu being named, and all of a sudden you look at that and you think, well, then that's very interesting that they've got Fujitsu there, because that would make it look more Open RAN. The problem with the Fujitsu, for me, there's two problems with Fujitsu being named. It's only one other player, by the way. It's not like this looks anything like Dish Network, where they've got all these multitude of different, or Rakuten's even, where they really have gone for this sort of mix and match approach. They've just got Fujitsu, this one company.
Okay.
Not said anything about how it's going to be deployed. So you've got these 50, 60,000 sites. I mean, someone really needs to sort of lean on AT&T, and they won't answer my questions at the moment. So someone who's sort of got access to them really needs to sort of lean on them very heavily and say, how many of those sites, of these 50, 60,000 sites, is Fujitsu going to serve as opposed to Ericsson? What's very clear is they plan to use Ericsson's radios. They said that in the press conference, is that they're using Ericsson. So they're obviously using Ericsson baseband. So that bit's not really Open RAN, is it? I mean, it might be based on the open front hall interface, but we're just taking Ericsson's word for it. There's been no... Nokia and other players in the market have gone over the last sort of year and a half, 2 years, doing interoperability tests. There was one recently between Nokia and Mavenir, I seem to remember, showing that they have compatibility, that they can slot together quite easily, showing that they've been working with open front hall 7.2x or whatever it might be for these radios, and they're able to sort of take advantage of that. There's not been a single announcement by Ericsson on that front. Nothing.
They're not. So I'm just going to do what...
Take Ericsson's word for it that it's all Open RAN compliant. The one more thing I'd say on Fujitsu before you move it on Ericsson and Fujitsu had a partnership back in 2018, I think. I mean, that was the year the O-RAN Alliance was formed, 2018. They've been working together possibly even before that. So it doesn't even mean it's Open RAN. They could just be, a lot of these big vendors have worked with smaller vendors, including some of the Japanese ones like NEC and Fujitsu, for long before Open RAN was a thing. They've had them in their kind of systems, if you like, and they've had compatibility, and they've been able to work together and deploy equipment together. That's not Open RAN.
So yeah, what I was going to do first is just what they call active listening, because I'm really playing catch up on this, whereas you've been in the weeds all week. My understanding of what you've said so far is they say it's Open RAN, but it's Ericsson radios. And are we assuming Ericsson providing the link between those radios and the rest of the network? That crucial Open RAN bit. Are we saying Ericsson is providing that link, or is that our assumption?
Well, the two components of the network, the two big components of the RAN, are the radio and the baseband.
Yeah,
those are two separate components.
And so if Ericsson's providing both, then obviously it's providing the means for them to communicate with each other. Yeah.
Well, there's not a bit of there's not an extra bit of kit for the front hall needs to be open basically to make sure these things work together. That's the idea of the RAN. But those are the two things that you buy. So
that's what I meant by the front hall. Again, just going back, excuse me if I'm being slow. The point of Open RAN in its inception was that the front hall is decoupled from the radio to enable mixing and matching of radio and baseband suppliers. Yeah,
that's the interface. Almost like
the interface.
The way you might think about an API, you need to open it up for somebody else to work with your stuff.
And so it would be.
Then you can't do it. You have to use what you've had to, and because it's been based on this thing called CIPRI in the past, this protocol called CIPRI, it's that has not allowed you, according to pretty much everyone actually, that's not allowed you to put an Ericsson like bit of baseband software with with the radio. And what the operators have wanted to do, this is the thing they've been pushing for originally with Open RAN, was to be able to go and buy them from different people. Yeah. Go and get radios from one source.
So what I'm getting to, like, I'm interrogating your point you made about the AT&T rationale, which is because this is all Open RAN compliant, we can still swap stuff out, even though we're going all in with Ericsson right now. Do you contest that assertion? Do you think that what they've got would still enable someone to swap out Ericsson's either radio or baseband software at some point down the line if it wanted to?
Well, how would we know? We just have to take their word.
Quite. So we have to take their word for it.
Because there's never been, you can go over Ericsson's press releases over the last 3 years while Open RAN's been a thing, and you'll find no stuff about Open RAN interoperability tests on there. The only thing they've ever said about Open RAN when it comes to this particular issue, the open front hall issue, rather than things like the RIC and some of that other sort of slightly tangential stuff, is this massive, we're going to provide Open RAN massive MIMO radios. I think they said it 3 or 4 weeks ago based on this option A. There was this big sort of problem that they had with the original interface when it comes to massive MIMO because of the requirements it's so demanding, that technology, that they felt the original front hall specification wasn't good enough and it needed to be tweaked. And what came out of that were these two, they're called operation modes. They're optional, basically. So you can still be considered Open RAN compliant if you do the original specification, or you can do them based on operation mode A, where you put a bit more functionality back into the radio, which is the one Ericsson likes. There's another one called operation mode B, where you don't put that functionality in the radio, but you do something else there instead. You do something called channel estimation to get over these problems that we're seeing on the performance side of things. Now, that's the only it's going off on a bit of a tangent, but that's the only statement really that Ericsson's made on front hall since in the last 2 or 3 years. The only public press releases it's come out with are about this. It's now getting it's not done any interoperability testing or anything like that. So
I'm only interrupting you more than usual because there's a few other angles I want to do, and we've only got about half an hour left. Just to summarize, because I did speak to Ericsson when I had lunch with them yesterday, and I said we're going to be talking about this on the pod. By the sounds of it, this was all quite hush-hush, even within Ericsson, until not long before the announcement was made.
Well, it's Ericsson today, though, isn't it, yesterday?
Yeah, that's fine. There's no criticism of them. We're in the middle of having nice lunch and all that sort of thing. But I just said to them, look, seeing as we're chatting, Iain and I are obviously going to talk about this, and I showed them your story, and they're like, okay, yeah, typical fucking Morris. They didn't say that, by the way. But that's me interpreting their body language.
The nice thing about Ericsson, I would say, is, I'm obviously very skeptical about this deal, as I think everybody should be, and I don't think it's. I actually think it's a little
Well,
bit.
I want to, before you get into that, I want to get into other reasons why you're skeptical. Let me just quickly summarize. If Ericsson's listened to this, which doubtless some of them will, what is the biggest question you would like them to answer about the Open RAN? Just the Open RAN aspect. We're going to get into the economics of this deal after this, but on specifically the Open RAN dynamics and characteristics, what's the biggest question you'd want them to answer?
Is it a proper Open RAN? How is it a proper Open RAN deal if most of the equipment's been provided by Ericsson? How much? I mean, for a start, how much Fujitsu is going to be there? That's one for both of them. It's more for AT&T really. If AT&T goes, we're putting Fujitsu out at 100 sites, it doesn't really mean very much, does it? If the whole of the rest of it's based on Ericsson equipment. Okay, it might. This is a point that John Baker makes quite a lot at Mavenir, and I actually agree with him on this. If you say it's Open RAN compliant, but everything still comes from the same vendor, is it really an Open RAN? Because all the issues I just drew attention to before about why you wouldn't swap equipment out in the future, because it's, you don't want to write off the cost of it. You don't want to, you don't want the hassle of doing that. If someone gets bad, you've probably got to replace everything anyway. It's still hard to do. It's disruptive for customers to replace equipment. So I think it's very unlikely that happens. I think unless you do it from the outset and it's multi-vendor from the beginning, it's probably not going to ever be multi-vendor unless you're doing densification and putting in new sites. Yeah. But if
so you're skeptical of that whole premise. That's good. Can I just, sorry, I'm going to move it on again just for the aforementioned reason.
Can I just say one other thing?
Yeah, go on.
Because you were asking about open front haul. So the other problem with this, take someone out and put someone else in, is that just because we have this open interface doesn't mean that you can, change it like a light bulb, right?
Yeah.
You talk to anybody in the industry, this whole notion that Open RAN is plug and play and that you can rip out a few antennas and a few radio units and stick in some other radio units and hey presto, because we've got an open front haul interface, it all works and there's no problem, is ludicrous. And that's not me saying that. That's the last person who said that to me on the record, I seem to remember, was Yaga Tenorio at Vodafone. He's very much into the whole concept and knows a lot about it. You've still got to do a huge amount of integration work and interoperability testing. And this is one of the real pain points of this project, is the need to have systems integrators or to do that stuff yourself. So it's another reason why you'd never do it. If you've got problems with a bit of equipment, you'd want the person that provided it to sort it out rather than taking it out and putting in new stuff, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, to go through that whole sort of integration hassle. So even if it is Open RAN compliant, and even if Ericsson is using these Open RAN interfaces, and I have no reason to doubt that they are necessarily, although we have to take their word for it. But even if you go along with that, it's very, very unlikely to happen for all these reasons.
Okay. And one last thing I'll say on that Open RAN-ness, and just having a quick look at the press release. Obviously, AT&T is an American operator. American government and state has taken a very active role in promoting Open RAN. So they're going to big up the Open RAN-ness of it for that reason as well, just to go, look, Biden, look, security, deep state, we're being good and we're jumping through all these Open RAN hoops like you are. So there's that as well. Now let me move it on, Ian. Your story, the only story of yours I've seen, you've probably written more, but the one that jumped out at me and one that I think has got lots of traffic, feel free to self-promote on that if you want, is the headline of your piece is AT&T's single RAN move may cost Ericsson up to $10 billion. And before I hand over to you, I'll point out that in the press release, which was sent by Ericsson, but it's probably that joint one that you spoke about, it says AT&T's spend could approach roughly 14 billion over the 5-year term of the contract with Ericsson. So are you saying that it may cost them up to 10 billion? Would that take their total revenue down to 4 billion? Or are you saying there's a net loss to them? Tell us more about that headline.
That 14 billion doesn't really mean very much. That's just the headline value of the contract. The point about the 10 billion, if you're taking out Nokia equipment and replacing it on a like-for-like basis, you have to pay for something twice, basically. You're paying for it.
Normally, it would be obsolete after, let's say, a decade. And then
if it's new equipment,
it would have depreciated. So it hasn't fully depreciated what they're swapping out.
if you're taking out a $50,000 dollar bit of kit and putting in another $50,000 bit of kit, then
Yeah.
you're essentially spending. You might have depreciated a bit, but you're spending a huge amount of money. Okay, you've then got all the services along with that you need to that need to go along with doing it. You've basically got a team of people working on that effort, and yeah, I mean that's basically what the estimate that I was given by people who were quite sort of close to what's going on about what Ericsson could face. Now AT&T won't be spending that money. There's no way that AT&T is going to sign up to a deal where it's writing off a huge amount of money on junking equipment that could still be used for another 5 years that works perfectly well and is really, really good. There's no way AT&T spending that money. So who's spending the money?
And so why were you confident enough to put that in a headline?
But that's what I'm saying. AT&T is not spending the money on replacing the kit. So who's the other party? Who's going to be bearing the cost?
But you said it will be Ericsson. Is that just your conjecture, or did you have any other information that, that made you come to that conclusion?
It doesn't say will. It doesn't say will.
Oh, okay, all right.
And it uses the word conjecture in the story.
But yeah, actually did say may. Yeah, fair enough.
So I can't prove that Ericsson's going to spend 10 billion to replace its network, basically. But that is, I think, if you think about this very carefully, and this, as I say, this is an estimate that came from someone fairly close to it. So, but you can't identify that person. But this is, it's conjecture, but there's no other way it could possibly work if you think it through.
No, unless AT&T was so desperate to show its Open RAN chops that it was prepared to take a bit of a hit, or if maybe they got some wedge off the government to speed it up.
Doesn't make sense.
You're not having that.
Why would they be desperate to sell their Open RAN chops? No one gives a shit about Open RAN. Do you think John
except the US government?
There's no way that the US government's leaning on them saying do an Open RAN deal, and by the way, make sure it's 100% Ericsson, which is a Swedish company. No fucking way.
But they might be leaning on them just to do more Open RAN stuff, and then they decided that this is. Right. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here.
As long as they're not doing Chinese, they don't give a toss. No one gives a shit about Open RAN. Let's be honest. It's an obsession for a bit of the industry. I don't think it's even something John Stankey cares about. Decisions don't go to that micro level at the CFO, CEO level. They just want a good deal economically. He's a cost cutter. He's someone who wants to take things out of, he wants to shed stuff. I mean, here's the other thing. So there's a link in that story to a website called thelayoff.com, where 3 weeks ago, people at AT&T were speculating that AT&T was going to go single RAN with Ericsson. This is 3 weeks ago. This is even earlier than Lund speculation. If you look at that website, and I did a lot of reading of that page, which actually got sent to me by certain people, there's a lot of talk about outsourcing in it. That what's going to happen is a lot of the people who are involved at AT&T in doing site maintenance and the technicians who sort of put stuff up will be moving to Ericsson as part of this arrangement. Which is another way for AT&T. Again, it sort of backs up the rationale that this is a deal that Ericsson has essentially bought.
Yeah.
Now, you might say, why would the bigger question is why would Ericsson do this? Because this is going to in the same way that a massive Vonage write-down showed up in its financial updates. You can't hide this sort of stuff. The truth comes out eventually. So this will hurt their operate. I mean, they often complain, to its vendors when they start to do a job like India. Our operating profits suffered a bit because there's a lot of startup work that goes on, and those early phases of rollout tend to be, they tend to be a costly thing to do. If the speculation's right, and that this is a deal where Ericsson's basically bought this, they're basically funding this huge swap that's going on for AT&T, then it will start to show up in Ericsson's financials. And the investment community might start to change its mind about whether this is a good thing for Ericsson. So you think to yourself, why is it a good thing for Ericsson? There's two reasons why I think it might be. One is they get AT&T as a captive customer. They're basically the only provider to AT&T.
Which is a big deal.
And they can raise prices in future. And the other reason is, which is a bit more kind of Machiavellian, that they feel they can sort of weaken Nokia to the point where it's not really competitive anymore.
Yeah. Well, look, superficially, it's an incredibly good deal for Ericsson. If you don't dig under the skin, which you've done very well, and obviously you should, and all journalists should, and I get the impression from my reading around that a lot of people have just taken this at face value and not dug any further. But superficially, it's a great deal. So, I mean, that kind of answers your rhetorical question by itself. Look at Ericsson's share price. It's up 12% this week. So that superficially answers your rhetorical question. But yeah, you're right. If people, if equity investors and people whose job it is to do exactly that, pick under the skin of it and go, hold on a sec, Ericsson's had to completely drop its pants on this, and it's barely making any like actual profit. Yes, it's a lot of superficial revenue, but the cost of sales effectively is a shitload. Then yeah, people will look into that. But just go on.
Just back to what's conjecture and what isn't. What we do know, right, is that these are the facts. Ericsson's coming in, right? They're replacing Nokia. Therefore, they have to take out Nokia stuff and put other stuff in.
That's fact.
That's fact. And then the question is, how much of that Nokia stuff is, to what extent is it depreciated? Well, this is where I'm on sources a bit, but you could. There's a cost of doing it. The job's expensive, and not all of it's depreciated from what I've heard. So there's a cost of doing this, a big cost of doing it. And there's no way that, as I say, it wouldn't make sense for AT&T if equipment was working well. And have you heard stories about problems with Nokia? Anywhere that Nokia is in AT&T's network, there's all these issues going on. I mean, this stuff that was happening on the 5G side when they weren't really considered.
No, as you said very well earlier, they seem to have sorted all that out.
You only need to sort of rationalize it a bit in your own head to sort of think that, this is, and then you look at as I say, the layoff.com. If these guys 3 weeks ago got wind of a single round deal with Ericsson coming up, and then they're speculating about outsourcing and staff having to move to Ericsson from AT&T, you've got to sort of take them seriously, haven't you? Because they're clearly right about one of those things.
Yeah. Okay. Just to quickly wrap this one off, and then we'll spend the last 15 minutes just doing one more story. Our coverage, written by Nick Wood, the headline was Nokia lowers guidance after AT&T picks Ericsson for Open RAN. And I thought it was remarkable that Nokia felt the need to send out a stock exchange release / press release, which was headlined Nokia comments on AT&T vendor plans. And it says, let me just read a couple of lines of it. Nokia is aware of AT&T's plans. Sorry?
They'd have to do that if they change their financial guidance. Yes,
no, fair enough. But it still was remarkable. I'm not saying it's exceptional. It's just noteworthy. Nokia is aware of AT&T's plans to commit to an Open RAN deployment in collaboration with other vendors over the next 5 years. As a result, Nokia now expects revenue from AT&T and mobile networks would decrease over the next 2 to 3 years. AT&T accounted to 5 to 8% of mobile networks net sales year to date. So let's pick the middle and say 6.5. So basically, they just suddenly lost 6.5% of revenue, and that's why they've got to talk about it. How big a negative do you think this is for Nokia? As our final comment on this.
Well, yes, it's bad because it's a big customer and they've already lost Verizon, so to lose AT&T as well, their position's
not looking good in North America, is it?
I mean, they have been on a bit of a roll in terms of building market share, Nokia, since 2019. They've actually done really well in terms of growing their market share, and then all of a sudden something like this happens. But the problem with losing AT&T is it's big. There's not like a comparable size customer in Europe, obviously, and it's a profitable market. There's the people seem to spend a bit more there, and they can charge a bit higher than they do in other countries.
Higher ARPU, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's better for the equipment vendors as well. So it's obviously a bad thing to happen. And this to me is something I find so ludicrous about Open RAN. It's almost laughable. This notion of Open RAN's going to introduce competition into the market. We're now in a situation, none of those little piddly little guys like Mavenir and Parallel Wireless have gone anywhere.
Oh, they won't thank you for calling them piddly.
They're piddly little guys in terms of market share. I hate to say it. Maybe they won't be in the future. Who knows? But they're piddly little guys. And the big three are still there. One's banned, right, from a lot of places, and the other one's now saying it's going to have to lay off. Like, this is even before this happened, between 9,000 and 14,000 employees. It won't reach its operating profit targets now for another 2 years. I mean, I bet that 9,000 to 14,000 range is going to be at the upper end now. So you're in a situation where, I mean, Ericsson's not exactly doing brilliantly.
No,
because everybody.
It's the first spike in their share price that they've seen for ages, I think.
Well, and also, as I say, all my conjecture is about the cost of this deal for Ericsson. turns out to be the case, then, and they've had a huge write down on Vonage. They themselves, I think, have announced earlier this year that they're cutting 8,500 jobs. So they're not exactly in a brilliant shape themselves.
No.
And this is partly what Open RAN has done.
Yeah, I tell you, actually, I was just looking at share price. I'm just on Google Finance, clicking through the date ranges. So this spike that Ericsson's just had only takes them up to where around about a peak over the summer, and the last time it was sustained at about this price was still only early this year. So even if we're being kind, and this is a sustained spike they're having now, it only takes them back to the start of this year. If you look at 5 years, damn, less than half of what it was in a peak in April 2021. So yeah, I mean, it's a win, and I think, well, I know because I was with them that Ericsson are really happy about it. But yeah, okay, we'll leave it at that.
The Ericsson UK team haven't thought about it there very much, really.
Well,
I hate to say it.
Well, they're probably listening.
What I would say,
Ericsson UK team.
One thing I would say about Ericsson, by the way, is that for all my skepticism and doing what I think journalists should do, but increasingly don't seem to, is they actually engage with you,
Yeah.
and that cannot be said for AT&T, who have this sort of slightly sort of 5-year-old thing with reporters where they don't want to have anything to do with you anymore if you write something that's critical of them. They seem to think that reporters should be doing a marketing job for them, and if they write anything that criticizes them or raises questions. So I don't mind calling them out on this. By the way, I was up pretty late on when the news came out. I couldn't sleep for some reason, so as early as in the morning, I was sort of looking at my laptop and noticed the press.
What a loser.
Yeah, I'm very sad, I know. But so I fired off an email to their press department, someone I sort of know and have. I won't call that person out because I think that would be not very fair. But fired off an email to the press department. I get an answer fairly soon back saying, "Oh, your colleague's on the press call," but don't answer the question. And then subsequently, they won't take questions from me anymore because they deem me to be too sensitive about things.
Is my colleague still on the press call, or can you fucking answer me now?
And also, he might not ask that question. So what are you saying?
No, that's facetious.
And the question, by the way, do you want to know what the question was? Is this a cloud RAN as well as an open RAN? Are you actually going to be using zero?
Right, so it's not that much.
And they couldn't answer the question. No. And apparently, press conference, it was so vague, which leads you to be even more suspicious about what this is. Is it just a purpose-built deal through and through?
Yeah, to generalize about my experience on the US side, and this is a massive generalization, there are obviously plenty of exceptions to this, but they do have a slightly more entitled, stroppy vibe from them on the press side, which is that journalists should just fucking stay in their box and not rock the boat. And it's like, what do you think journalism is?
I've heard them describe the way they've put it before to colleagues of mine is that you're on the naughty list. We're not engaging in it.
I mean,
it's like being in the sin bin. When you get sort of penalised in rugby. Is that what they call rugby? You sort of get put on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
you're out of the game for 15 minutes. They have an equivalent. They think they can treat journalists like that. I mean, I'm sorry, but who do you think holds the?
Exactly, it's completely idiotic. Sorry, I just interrupted you, but I think you were just about to say this. It's completely idiotic. The reason you engage with us is because we're going to write what we want, and if we've got no link with you, there's nothing to stop. There's nothing for us to. I'm not saying that we would moderate it just because they take us out and get us pissed every now and then, but we would have a more informed. Let's say you were writing something that's heavy on conjecture, and they engage with you. That would help you refine your conjecture, wouldn't it? That's why they engage, not because it's a privilege.
Totally. I've always, and I actually had a meeting with Verizon representatives earlier this week in London because they do deal with Verizon Business on an international basis. Yeah. And clearly they read the coverage and they know, and they were sort of questioning, whether engaging with me because I'm perceived to be one of the more critical journalists would benefit. And I sort of said, it can't do any harm. I mean, I think whenever I've actually had a decent relationship with an operator, I've always been able to look at things more favourably. I haven't gone out and do that, but I'll give a classic example of that is Orange, where I think we have a very good relationship with Orange, is the best of the European operators, I would say, in terms of its press relations and in putting you in front of executives. And I challenge anybody to go over the things I've written about Orange over the years and not view it balanced and fair and Yeah.
This used to be PR 101. It was just standard issue. That's why you have PR. And I think, and I'm going to stop it here because we're running out of time. But I think this is partly a product. Sorry if you can hear my dog kicking off in the background. This is partly a product of how I think PR on the whole has been debudgeted. I think there's just the proportion of a typical large corporate spend that goes to PR and earned coverage has diminished. And then part of it is just a general sort of risk aversion, I think, which maybe is related.
Do you want to get your dog involved in the podcast? Because he sounds like he wants. Do you know what I'm going to do now? You're going to have to talk for a bit because I'm going to go and get another beer from the fridge.
Okay, but mate, I wouldn't bother because we're going to wrap up in 10 minutes.
Are we really? Is it that soon? 10 minutes?
Yeah. We've got a hard stop at 1:45. Otherwise, I would have encouraged you to, and I'm getting low as well. But I figure it's only 10 minutes, so let's quickly crack on. Especially as I'm going to throw the ball to you straight away, Ian. You're particularly knackered because we've had all this going out that we've just spoken about, and of course, the last pod we did, we were both knackered and hungover after the awards. And you braved the trains. Maybe they were better yesterday than the day before, and you went to a BT event. So why don't you quickly tell us what that was all about?
Yeah, so BT had an event at BT Tower, which is interesting. Never been there before. So managed to go upstairs where the revolving risk be. And I didn't realise actually how functional BT Tower, how important it still is in terms of what it does. So most of the UK's TV content goes through BT Tower. It's processed there.
Really?
Yeah, all the broadcast stuff is still like dealt with by guys at BT Tower. So yeah. And so they have all these like rooms that look like something out of Homeland, or 24 or whatever. But yeah, they were basically showing the innovation they've come up with called MAUD, I think is the acronym.
Right.
Stands for multi-user assisted, multicast assisted unicast something.
Right. I'm going to look it up. Seeing as you're struggling.
I mean, it's better if I describe what it is rather than.
Yeah. All right, carry on. I'm looking up your own story on it to help you out. And if you even
when you have live sports, you always get these huge data peaks going on at the moment. I think they had one this week about 30.1 terabits per second. They were saying with all these sort of Premier League matches being screened at the same time, and the industry likes to grumble about this, and it gets us into issues like fair share and this notion that maybe the streamers themselves should be coughing up. But I'm quite impressed. BT seems to have actually taken a more proactive, what can we do about it technologically to try and fix this, rather than just sort of moaning about the who's to blame and what to do about that. And MAUD is kind of one of their proposed solutions to it. So what happens at the moment is when you're streaming something, there's like one stream per user. And that's the reason why these data levels are so high. You've got this sort of gargantuan amount of streams going over these networks, chewing up per capacity. And what MAUD does is it basically converts them all into one stream. You take one stream per channel rather than one stream per user, and you use this clever software at the end of the line to break it apart again and kind of.
Okay. And so what, it's just more, is it at the bottom line, is it just more network efficient?
The bottom line is, to get away from the technology, because I wouldn't want to try and describe it in any other way than that, because I'll start to get confused. But the bottom line is that it's basically a much more efficient way of transporting the traffic over the network to such an extent where, and I was a bit surprised they didn't put this in the press release, but only came out with it in the actual press conference. But they were saying they reckon so this is the problem. Everything's going onto IP networks off traditional broadcasting platforms. There's this and if everything, so there's a lot of conjecture in this, but they were basically saying if everything did go over, if all the sort of broadcast stuff at the moment was to move on to broadband IP networks, and current trends continue, then the industry's facing another sort of 16.5 billion pounds in this country in investment to cope with all of that. And that MAUD would basically tackle that. It basically sort of removes the need to spend that money.
Well, can't we just get Netflix to pay for it instead? It's a fair contribution.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that I think it's impressive.
Being facetious.
By the way, that's not 16.5 billion for BT. That's not 16.5 billion for BT. It might actually be Netflix. So their share of it's actually quite small. Howard Watson was there, and I sort of pressed him a bit on this, and he said, well, we reckon for us it's about an extra billion. So it's not a huge amount for BT. If you think about it, if it's a transition that takes place over a decade, and they're facing $1 billion in extra costs that they could get rid of through this more technology. That's obviously incredibly helpful, but the message is other players would benefit as well.
Yeah.
And the experience would be better and everybody's kind of better off. So it's almost like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you introduce
No,
this?
seems it.
And the deployment costs, from what they were saying, are not. I mean, the whole thing is it's supposed to save costs. So then the obvious logic is that it doesn't cost very much to deploy. And they were like, yeah, it shouldn't do. It doesn't make a big difference in terms of the content delivery networks themselves in integrating it. It should be quite easy to integrate. There's a bit of a challenge at the user premises. So that all of these BT smart hubs that they're now sending out to homes apparently will already support this technology, but some of the older ones won't.
Okay.
And there's a bit of an issue there. And then the other challenge is, how do they kind of deploy it for other ISPs? You know, if other operators wanted to use it,
Yes,
could be an opportunity for BT to sort of market its technology to other companies. But I don't think it sees it as like a big commercial. I mean,
right.
they can roll it out cheaper themselves and then say you're going to have to pay us a fortune to use it, can they? So they're not sort of viewing it as a big kind of commercial sales opportunity. But it's
Right. But I mean, if it's a piece of technology that saves other companies money, then they'll pay money for it. I mean, that's basically what technology is you spend money, you invest in order to save money in the long term, thanks to the technological upgrade.
And there might be some sales opportunity there, but I think it's a bit awkward for them as a company using it, saying it doesn't cost much to do and we can use it and save money.
Fair enough. And then suddenly start charging.
Then go and flog it to Sky and say, you have to pay these huge royalties. Because I think what they want to do is try and partner with someone. So partner with one of these kind of video delivery product vendors to integrate it into their technology, and then they do the marketing of it, and maybe BT gets a little bit from intellectual property revenues. But Howard Watson really played that down. He was like, the bigger thing for us is actually just trying to save money on what we have to spend and what partners have to spend and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the quote that Andrew, who wrote it up, just said from the canned quote from Howard Watson: Maud is a major breakthrough in how we deliver content over the internet. ... By combining individual streams, Maud delivers more reliable, consistent picture, no matter whether customers are watching over Wi-Fi, fiber, or mobile networks. But it does, like, back to my sort of slightly facetious point about fair contribution, and we said this last week when we were chatting about it, and have loads of times before. Yes, something's got to give in terms of growing traffic and declining ARPUs, but the best answer is technology, where that traffic is delivered in a more efficient, more compressed, less expensive way. So this maybe is one of those possible.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm, I don't think I put this in my coverage, but I mean, it gets like the point we just made about AT&T. If you actually go and visit these players and get their perspective, unless you're a very strange human being, you don't necessarily want to make them out in your write-up to be muppets and morons or pick up on too many of the negatives. But I think
for the podcast. Yeah,
but from that, yeah, exactly. But from their perspective, it does kind of make you question the fair contribution. Does this kill the fair contribution debate? If they can provide more, and apparently the big problem is all about video streaming, isn't it? Let's be honest. It's not people BBC News website. It's all about video streaming. If more deals with that problem really effectively, then does the whole fair contribution thing go away?
Well, indeed.
Does it sort of silence the debate in a sense? But I just think it's really good on BT's, if I'm going to take BT's side, that they're thinking proactively about this and trying to come up with solutions instead of doing what some of the European telcos do, which is just to sort of whinge about it and grumble that they need some money from internet companies.
And I was thinking about it, if it's not a major commercial thing, why did they bother to invite? And they did invite me, and I apologize, BT, for not being able to make it, but at least we wrote it up. They invite us to the BT Tower and make a big thing of it. And maybe that's from another, indicated from another part of, well, let me just say my one, and then you can say if you agree. The other part of Howard Watson's canned quote is developed in our world-leading labs at Adderstall Park. And I get the impression they're doing it just to show their R&D chops, but what do you think?
No, I think they're really serious about it. They want to get it rolled out. It's something they want to get used in the UK over the next few years. In fact, they've got a partnership with BBC now to start introducing it. I think the main reason for getting the press up to talk and actually ask,
spread the word
that what they do need, this is the challenge, and this is the bit where it's a little bit unsure about how quickly they can move with it, is they need the content delivery networks and the internet guys and the rest of the community, if you like, to sort of buy into this. And there's always this possibility that they're looking at alternative options, that there's not just this one multicast thing that BT's come up with. There are other things that might be in the market that they might prefer, or it might just be difficult to bring people to the table to make sure that we get this kind of rolled out in a smooth way. And I think that's the big thing, is they want to get the message out and help sort of spread the word, if you like, so we can actually start using this and get to grips with that cost issue. I think that's the main thing.
Okay.
I think the research thing doesn't hurt to show off adaptive parking. Sure.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I mean, like someone, I don't know, maybe it was at that Future Vision event last week, when I think we were talking about telco to techco, and someone went, "What do you mean telco to techco? AT&T's been a techco for a fucking 100 years. I mean, they always used to have Bell Labs and all that sort of thing, and BT has had this Adastral Park in Suffolk thing for a while. So maybe they've always been techcos. Anyway, let's not get into that. What was I going to say? So yeah, sorry again, BT, for not making it. But then you got coverage on Telecoms.com, and we're talking about it on the pod. So my conscience is clear. I'm going to sign off, Ian, by saying congratulations on the Christmas tree. That looks pretty good. You actually, you went off and bought a proper one. I never bothered to do that. We just got one that gets stuck in the attic every year, an artificial one that gets unfurled.
How much that cost?
Go
on. £10.
Tenner?
Yeah, it's big as well. Magda got some.
Yeah, it looks pretty big.
Yeah. So
your other half got a good deal.
Yeah, she wanted to put a proper one up, and it was £10, and it's up. And I had no involvement in it whatsoever.
Well, then congratulations to Magda, not you. But I just saw it there in the background. I also noticed in my background's blurred. There's a funny little story on that, and then I'll probably sign off unless you've got anything else to say. The reason it's blurred is I was doing a commercial Zoom call, and the feedback we had from the client is that my office is a bit of a shithole. Those weren't their precise words, but that was the impression I got. And I was like, all right, I'll blur it, and I just left it on. So there we are. That's why you didn't get to see the sheer majesty of my filing cabinet and my boxes of wires and crap, which is what's generally behind me. Cool, mate. I think we better stop there because people have got stuff to do. Promise the next one will be longer and in person, unless the trains decide to have a last-minute major strike. So I will just sign off by saying thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for that one. And that'll be our last of the year, so make sure you check it out. Okay, bye.